respect the fact that all of you are here right now. You want to learn a little bit more about your health. We're going to be mildly entertaining, but be educational. So welcome. Our panel's name is Beyond Hitpoints, Healthy Behaviors in and Around Games. My name is Dr. M, also known as GamerDoc. Hey, we sign my rounds after $200 a pop. Over the next hour or so, we're going to explore some healthy behaviors and not so healthy behaviors in and around some of our favorite video games. But before we do that, I would like to also introduce the wonderfully talented and educated females I have sitting next to me. So,
You're the only one standing.
yeah, I'm the only one standing. Thanks, Rachel.
We do stand.
Standing on their butts.
I'm Cait. I'm a physical therapist. I have a doctorate in physical therapy. My background is in neuroscience, exercise, and sports science. I've been working in gaming and esports for about 5 years now. I help to lead a company called 1HP. We do a lot of consulting with esports teams, helping their players develop healthier lifestyles, health and wellness and performance programming. I also work with EXO Academy, which is under the Red Bull umbrella. We work on getting more high-tier competitive women into fighting games. And we do a little bit as well with high schools and colleges who are developing their own esports programs that now get like scholarships and grant funding, which is pretty great.
I am Dr. Rachel Kowert. I'm a research psychologist and I'm the research director of TakeThis, which is the first mental health nonprofit to work exclusively within the gaming industry and gaming communities. We run the AFK room, which is room 251 upstairs, the quietest room in the convention by design. If you want a break from the hustle and bustle of the floor, which I do every at least couple hours, go and check it out. I have been studying games and gamers for about 10 years with a specific focus on media ethics.
I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. I am a mental health advocate. I am a TakeThis ambassador. My background is in medical editing and in research, and I have a mental health focused talk show on Mixer.
I forgot to introduce myself, though. Like I said, who I was, but I didn't introduce. I'm doing amazing, sweetie. So, my name is Dr. M. I swear I'm a real doctor, practicing medical doctor in the DC area. During my day job, I treat traditional athletes, and then I treat esports athletes. So, very happy to be here and remembering to introduce myself. All right, let's do some science. So, I'm going to do a little quick intro about why this matters and why video games affect our brain. I don't have any slides because I think if you need slides to pay attention, then I'm not interesting enough. So, if you find yourself, like, getting distracted, it's my fault. Just start throwing those tomatoes we handed out at the front. So, for those of you super nerds like me out there who have been gaming since, like, the womb, you know that video games affects you, right? And no one's ever I want to preface this by saying video games do not cause violence. Please do not use my quotes to say that. That's not what I'm going to say, but the content we ingest and the things we do all day affects our perceptions. They affect how we look at the world, they affect our personality, and there's science behind that, okay? So everyone, get your science hats up. Good. I love the rule following in here. So, I want to talk about a 1970s study for a second. In the 1970s, they took these two groups of kids, and one of them, they had watched Sesame Street for 6 months. And the other group, they had not watched Sesame Street for a couple months. And this was the 70s, right? So in the 70s, perceptions of health were a little strange. So like Sesame Street was good. It was teaching these kids something. And they found that in those two groups, that first group who watched Sesame Street, their IQ rose about 5 points in 6 months. These are like little kids, right? And this is the 70s. In the 70s, remember, that shaky belt thing? Right? That was the #1 fitness trend at the time. There was this thing called the sexy pineapple diet. I'm not making this up. Basically, you ate pineapple 2 days a week and nothing else. And you're supposed to lose weight. Nowadays, people do that for a different reason. What are you guys laughing at? Good. So, monkey see, monkey do, right? What we look at on television, what we passively watch affects, can raise our IQ. It can have, far-reaching consequences. But anyone whose partner or kid is trying to talk to them while they're playing video games knows it's not passive. There's nothing passive about video gaming, right? It's active. We're actively doing something. So, in 2017, these smart people got together, they were PhDs, not medical doctors, and they looked at all of the studies out there on video gaming and the brain. And they found that there were structural changes in your brain after playing video games. Gamers had structural changes in their brains when compared to the normal people out there. And in those areas were things like attention, was visual spatial learning, which is basically like if you imagine a puzzle piece and you have to rotate it in your mind to find the puzzle piece, that's kind of what it is. And they also found changes in this area of our brain called our prefrontal cortex. Now, our prefrontal cortex is what makes us human. Okay, what makes us be able to talk, but also what had us evolve from or however you think we were created is what makes us human. And what your prefrontal cortex does is things like personality, goal-directed behavior, and also a big one, which is our value system, all comes from our prefrontal cortex. And they found that people who play video games have changes in their prefrontal cortex, right? What we watch, what we play affects our brain, it affects our perceptions, it affects our goal-directed activity, it affects our personalities. And this is just passively, right? Unconsciously. Click your pen, it really threw me off. You take notes on what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now that's passively. Now let's try and today what we're going to do is we're going to actively learn. We're going to actively learn some stuff from our favorite characters because, you know, anyone who's been in a single player game for a while knows that you get attached to the characters, right? You feel their feelings. You are so empathetic towards them and you're passively learning from them, but we also can look at them now and tell a different story about them and kind of actively learn from them. So, is that everything I want to say? Yeah, that's everything I want to say.
All right.
So I'm going to turn this over to our first panelist, and we're going to do some active learning. Okay, we're active learners here. Woo! All right.
I will at some point ask people to take things out and hold them. So if you've got a heavy object near you, great. That's going to be helpful for the demo portion of this. But we're going to start off a little bit talking about ergonomics and sleep hygiene. The most recent game that I have played that has any reference to ergonomics, people got any guesses about what games have recently come out in the past year that might have ergonomic concerns?
Ring Fit?
Definitely Ring Fit. Ring Fit's a good one, though.
Yeah. Beat Saber?
Beat Saber also?
I was gonna say Beat Saber.
All right. The one we're going to go over today, though, is a little bit less active, a little bit more passive. Here is Sam Bridges of Death Stranding, sleeping.
Hell yeah.
So he looks great, his sleeping posture doesn't. That being said, I don't know too many of us who can fall asleep comfortably like this. But when Sam wants to go to sleep in-game, he goes either and sits down in the wilderness with all of his boxes behind him and kind of leans on those and falls asleep fitfully, not so well, or he finds a safe area. And his safe areas all look exactly the same because that's easier for rendering things in video games. But also, we can kind of translate that to a real-life comparison, right? When you're going to sleep, your body takes certain cues from the environment around you. Sometimes it takes cues in the form of, this is the last time I ate. I know that about 4 hours after the last time I ate, I fall asleep. More often, it takes cues from light. Our circadian rhythm, our sleep and awake cycle is almost entirely based on light and kind of the sunrise, sunset phase of the day. Obviously, all of us totally go to bed, a couple hours right after the sun goes down, and we never, ever, ever stay until 2 o'clock in the morning because there's some great content out in Billboard too. That being said, artificial light can also impact our sleep-wake cycle. So having a screen near you, having your phone on, watching TV before bedtime, all of those are cues to your brain. It's not time to sleep yet, it's time to stay awake. So if you want to improve your sleep hygiene, your ability to fall asleep quickly and easily, one of the things you can look at is when was the last time I saw a screen? You can also do something like what Sam does, a familiar environment. So making your bedroom a space that is for sleeping. Maybe a couple other things, but mostly for sleeping. Having it be a certain temperature when you're going to bed, having like a certain set routine that you do before you go to sleep, and having a certain set routine that you do when you wake up. All of those things help to cue your circadian rhythm when your access to light is a little bit altered. Or when, say, you're traveling out to a convention and you're in an environment that's unfamiliar, you can still set your same routines. My go-to routines before I go to sleep, I write my journal for about 10 minutes, I do a little bit of stretching, and I drink a glass of water, and I'm out. In the morning, I get up, I do a little bit of stretching, I take a shower, and I'm awake after coffee. Coffee is also an important part of the morning routine. Your morning routine doesn't have to look like that. It can look however you want it to. We can kind of take this behavior in game, familiar environment, consistent routine, and apply it to our lives in a way that's useful and helpful. The other big thing that Death Stranding is, of course, known for is carrying very large amounts of boxes. Let's talk about carrying small amounts of boxes first, because I've been happier about that. This is Sam carrying a small amount of boxes. The nice thing that he's got going on here is the placement of the boxes. And this is the part where we're all going to be interactive. Take out your phone, a water bottle, or something heavy.
Something heavy?
Hold out in front of you. Arm all the way extended. I want you to hold here as long as you can. You can keep sitting.
I can't.
So the thing about how our bodies distribute forces, the closer a thing is to your center of gravity, the lighter it, relatively speaking, is. Holding something out here, I could probably hold this phone out here for maybe 3-ish minutes. I'm going to start to get sore pretty quickly. I could not hold anything terribly heavy out here. Those of us who have tried to make the grocery run in one trip, you know that you don't carry bags out here, you carry them like this. Bring your phone in, or your heavy object in. You could absolutely hold this right here much longer, because it's closer to your center of gravity, which is your navel, right here. So the closer something is to your navel, the easier it is to carry. The closer Sam's heavy boxes are to the center of mass, the easier it is for him in-game. He's able to run faster, he doesn't fall over as much, you don't have to deal with picking up all the boxes that fell off when you tumbled down a hill, unlike when you're running like this, which also slows down your ability to run and messes with your posture. You can see here, Sam is running mostly upright. Here he is bent almost in half because he's had to shift his center of mass to account for the weight of all the boxes around him. So the way that you manage your load, both in-game and in real life, is pretty relevant. When you are, say, at a convention and you are carrying some things around with you, carrying something in a backpack with 2 straps strapped right to your back is going to leave you with the least sore shoulders and neck pain. Carrying something in a shoulder bag just over one shoulder, over time you're going to affect your posture, you're going to start to get sore more on one side than the other. And if you're only carrying like a handbag, for example, that one you're probably going to get the most tired of carrying around the quickest because for crying out loud, you don't have one hand and you can't take all the free samples anymore. So your load management is as important out of game as it is in game, and that's not just when it comes to your physical health either. Your load management can also refer to the cognitive load that you're dealing with, the amount of processing that you have to do in your environment. In Death Stranding, Sam has certain areas that going through he has to be very careful to avoid, where he's going to put BTs, which evil monsters from another dimension that are going to attack, basically. So his ability to scan his environment and process is more limited when he's doing it by himself. It is less limited when he has his BD, the little fetus that Norman Reedus carries around with him, which is utterly adorable and also a little bit weird. But when he has someone else with him to help him process the environment around him, it's easier. So this is both a recognition that cognitive load is something that can be shared, and also that we're social creatures. We interact, we require communities around us, and the more that we have supportive communities of people that we care about, who care about us, who we are invested in, and who are invested in us, the easier our load becomes, cognitively speaking. And that's definitely going to be a theme that Rachel and Emma are going to do.
I was going to say that is such a great transition. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I'm going to talk a bit about mental health representation, but also in terms of a very good representation. So mental health, mental illness impacts 20% of the population. 1 in 2 individuals experience a diagnosable mental illness in their lifetime. And research has found that the information that we receive about mental illness and mental health, the media is the most influential factor for most of us. And as video games are the largest media that we have now, billions of people play video games, it's important that we consider the ways in which mental health are represented in games. We could talk for 15 hours about how they're represented poorly, but today we're going to spend 10 minutes talking about how they're represented well. And I am going to talk about Stardew Valley. Woo! It's such a wonderful game. It makes my heart so happy. TakeThis actually has the Dr. Mark Award, which is given to games that have hopeful and accurate representations of mental health, and Stardew Valley was the first recipient of this award. So Stardew Valley, I'll be honest, when I started playing Stardew Valley, I came across Shane, and I was like, he is a jerk. I don't like him, and I have a Discord with some colleagues, and I'm like, what is wrong with Shane? And they were like, no, really, like, push through, and I'm like, he's so rude to me. I try to talk to him, they don't even want to talk to me. Turns out I'm a terrible person, and Shane is lovely. So we're going to talk a bit about Shane. So if you are not familiar with the game, you live in a village, have a farm, and there are many people who live in the village with you who you can get to know and befriend and eventually marry. And you have to earn 10 hearts with a person, and then you can marry them. So if you can get past Shane blowing you off, and you persist like a good person would, you get to his 2 heart event. And at his 2 heart event, you see him sitting on the docks alone, drinking a beer, and he has a conversation, hey, how you doing? And then all of a sudden he says, do you ever feel like no matter what you do, you're going to fail? Like you're stuck in some miserable abyss and you're so deep you can't even see the light of day. I just feel like no matter how hard I try, I'm not strong enough to climb out of that hole. Which is such a powerful thing for someone to say. And I think a lot of times depression is represented in a way that's maybe one-dimensional and maybe more just like a person is sad. And this is really getting at the heart of how multi-layered an individual's experience can be with depression. Then he goes on to say like, oh, just don't listen to me, and he drinks his beer and he goes off. Then if you get to his 6 heart event is when we see Shane hit more of a rock bottom. And this is going to talk about content that is about depression and suicide. And if you do not want to be part of that conversation, I want to absolutely give you that opportunity to not be part of it. So you find Shane, and Shane does drink a lot. He's a substance abuser, and you find him kind of passed out on the side of a mountain. And you find him, and he says, my life is a pathetic joke. Why do I try? I'm too small and stupid to take control of my life. So in terms of representing depression in an accurate way, we're seeing things like suicidal ideation, we're seeing feelings of worthlessness, we're seeing feelings of guilt. And then Shane asks you as the player why he shouldn't just roll off the cliff. And this is such a powerful moment because you have different chat options. You can say your family needs you, you can say, I think suicide is a sin, I think is an option. And one of them is more of the effect that you can make your own decisions, like, I'm here for you, but you know, you are in power of your own life. And it's a representation you don't see often in games in terms of giving you these non-stereotypical ways to kind of respond to this kind of crisis situation. And when you respond that way, you know, he ends up going to see the doctor. He ends up getting a reference to a mental health practitioner. He ends up going to a therapist and having treatment. And in the end, he raises chickens, and it's amazing. And his little picture becomes him with like his best friend chicken, and it's a beautiful story. And it's really nuanced, and it shows the power not only of how individuals can interact with others who are facing struggles, but it shows you how struggles can be different and nuanced in every person's individual expression of what that might look like. And also it shows someone getting treatment and it being a positive thing, which in the media is, as a psychologist, I love seeing that because that's like 1 out of every 100 expressions that you see about people going to see treatment. So yeah. And the doctor says, times can be tough, but there's always hope for a better future. And that's such a wonderful thing to have, especially in video games. I mean, it's a very deep thing to have, kind of like tucked into starting into a farming simulator. But it also, as GamerDoc was telling us, we learn from these things. So the expression of mental health in the media, we learn lots of negative kind of stereotypical things like, oh, psychotic people break out of mental institutions and they're violent, which is, they're more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime, so that's not true. But it also can teach us just like depression can be part of an individual's experience, and there could be light at the end of the tunnel. There are different ways to interact, and don't be the horrible human who says this guy is a jerk and I don't like him. Because in the end, you know, the power of friendship and social connection goes a long way. So yeah, we love Stardew Valley.
Right. How many people want to play Stardew Valley now? Right? Like, I'm gonna go get it, guys.
Aw.
Stardew Valley, so very, very funny. trigger warnings. I'm here to talk about a less warm and cozy game, Life is Strange. It is a fantastic game, but so for those of you who clapped, you probably remember episode 2, and some of you might be scarred from it. Just a little bit of background. The game is kind of, I kind of called it like Teenage Angst, the simulator, but what the idea is that you're thrown into these situations and you're a teenager and you're very much not prepared, and there's a mystery happening in the school, and there's like murder, there's a lot going on in this game. But in the second episode, in the first episode, you're introduced to a character who is going through quite a hard time because of video. She was drugged and raped. They don't give like explicit details, but she did not have a good time at this party that she went to, and the video was uploaded to the internet. And she's very religious, so this to her is like, it's the end of her life. This is it. And people in the school continue bullying her, so she's dealing with that. And you make a series of choices before you talk to her in this big moment at the end of episode 2. And those choices are, she calls you when she's not feeling well, you can either pick up or not pick up. At one point you walk around kind of sleuthing over around all the dorm rooms, and you have the option to go through her stuff and like read her Bible excerpts and stuff. And all of that comes into play when you find out that she's standing on the roof and she's about to end her life. And it's up to you to talk her down. For those of you who have played, how many of you did not succeed at talking her down? Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. And it's the odds are not in your favor. The odds, if I'm not mistaken, are like 6-4 in favor of her jumping. And she comes onto the roof and she's very much, she's pushing you away. She doesn't want to deal with it. And your goal, the next few things that you do are, not only is her life in your hands, but it's also the wrong answers, the quote wrong answers, are the ones that we tend to lean on because we tend to try to say things that, you know, situation's scary, so I'm going to say something that might make me feel better, right? I'm going to say something that I hope this person wants to hear. And so the choices that you make then influence also how she talks to you. So if you don't pick up the phone before she will say, like, you will say to her, hey, you matter to me, you're a friend of mine. And she'll be like, you didn't even pick up the phone. And then you either lie to her, and that makes things worse, or you continue encouraging her and letting her know that she's not alone. So I remember when you run up to the roof and you're starting to sit area, the first thing I think I said to my stream was, I'm so glad I have mental health first aid training, and I hope it helps. And so one of the things that you learn both as a TakeThis ambassador and in mental health first aid training is one of the things that you want to do to somebody who is experiencing a crisis, that you can't just take her off the roof and bring her to a professional, right? And I'm sure some of us who are streamers here have encountered somebody DMing them and being like, hey, I'm really in a bad space, save me, basically. And so one of the things that is recommended is that you just make sure that this person is heard and you validate their concerns. And so things that you don't want to say are things like, it'll be fine eventually, or your parents love you, don't you want to live for them? And things that seem encouraging but really pull away from that person's pain, right? Saying something like, your parents would care if you were gone does not really help you if you're in a place where you're like, well, I don't feel like my life is worth anything right now. I don't really care what my parents think or whoever. And so those are really, really important moments. And you have in your choices, if you lie, if you approach her too quickly and you start cornering her, she starts backing up towards the ledge closer. She also, if you start giving her false promises, so if you say something like, it's going to get better, or you tell her it's just a stupid video, so something that invalidates her, again, her pain. So if you say something like, it's just a stupid video, people are going to get over it, it's the internet, that makes her go like, well, my life, I don't want to wait for people to get over it, my life isn't worth it now. And she straight up just goes, she's gone after that. And yeah, so if you lie, if you tell her that what she's going through doesn't matter, she's also religious, and if you bring up religion so it's very clear that she was raised in a very oppressive Catholic environment where religion was used as a way to control her and to make her, stay in line. And so that, again, comes in hand when you're standing on the roof, and if you say something like, oh, if you end your life, it's a sin, similar to the chain.
Not a good way.
Yeah. But if you end up going through her Bible, you actually have a passage that's meaningful to her. So that's something, if you know somebody and you have a little bit of that background, which we're not always privy to when we get those, very scary DMs, that is helpful, and that uses something that she can relate to bring her back into a more comfortable space. Just letting things that are important, so I talk about a lot, like, don't do this, don't do this, but things that are important and that end up saving her are telling her, again, that she matters, that you will be that, like, her situation sucks and you acknowledge that, but you will be there for her and you want to get through it with her, okay. And telling her that, like, it's okay, you understand why she would want to do this, but you hope she doesn't. So again, at any moment that you can, you give that little validation without presuming, without telling this person, this is what you have to do, right? And statements like, what will your parents do, or we will miss you, are things that are more soothing to you versus letting this person know that their pain is valid. And so I just felt like it was not only an act, I saved her. I had to watch her die like 6 times. And I just found the whole experience was, it brought together a lot of my knowledge, and I was very grateful to have it. And I think it was also great in highlighting things that we pull towards and we think will help, but might not always. And because it gives you, so it's a multiple choice situation, so because it gives you multiple choices and it gives you multiple options to go back and give her a different answer, you can kind of whittle down, and ultimately you are passively, but kind of actively learning mental health first aid, because every action that you take results in her saving her life or not. The stakes are high.
Wow. I'm just constantly amazed whenever these women talk, because you guys know so much. You know a lot more than me. So we intentionally left a lot of time at the end for questions. Everyone up here is pretty active on social media. Some people stream, some people are more on Twitter, other people produce articles and content. And I think I can only speak for myself, but I do have interacted with them in a while. And healthcare information and education is pretty inaccessible. You get a lot of sensationalist headlines out there, sensationalist articles, there's lots of bad depictions, so we want to try and help change that a little bit. And I want to preface this by saying none of this is intended to be medical advice. This is made for entertainment and educational purposes. So, but if you guys have any questions about any things we said, but I will warn you, if you start with this is less of a question and more of a comment, we're gonna throw tomatoes at you.
The aforementioned tomatoes.
The aforementioned tomatoes.
What kind of tomatoes?
Cherry. Cherry. So they're gonna hurt a little bit.
Like
BB.
They're not gonna splatter.
They're not gonna splatter my content.
No, I just had a question about, because all of you are active on social media and you were talking about the sensationalist headlines, I wanted to ask your opinions on the cancel culture that's been happening on Twitter. Just like, how do you think that affects people who are either
Oh no, this is good question. One thing, go for it.
Keep going.
just in general, like what do you think about it?
So it is absolutely terrifying. The mob culture. So I call it. It's basically the equivalent of coming out with torches and bringing somebody into the square and killing them in giving them social, social homicide?
Homicide.
Oh, yeah, let's use those terms.
Social execution?
Yes. And the problem is there is a healthy way to do it, and that healthy way is educational, and that healthy way is usually not doing it in the public square, right, of Twitter. And I have gotten into conversations with people where I've said, like, hey, why don't we continue this in DMs? And they've said, I have nothing to hide. We're going to continue having this conversation here. And not only did I feel backed up into a corner, but also it just wasn't as productive because, like, I didn't see the point. It was basically like, show the people I'm going to expose you for who you really are.
Right.
So there's this idea now that is absolutely terrifying to me that one person can have the power to make or break what happens to you. And for a lot of people, like my social media presence has been built up over 2.5 years. I don't think I've done anything to offend anybody,
Right.
but I also am in a position where I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to say something and people are going to take it the wrong way and I'm going to have to, issue an apology and all that stuff. But I have a friend who, and I'm not going to mention her name, but she's a pretty big streamer and she almost ended her life over because she was being canceled. And being through that with her was like a whole nother lens of, all right, I can't just sit here and be quiet about it. And it doesn't help to just post. Some people will be like, oh, I feel like if we just were all less about cancel culture, kind of, if you're backhanded posting about how much you hate cancel culture, that's not really helping. But saying something reassuring to that person and letting them know, like, hey, I'm here if you need to talk, and I might not agree with you, but I still feel like you're a person and you deserve to be treated like a person. And again, like, that I think the healthier thing to do, and not everybody will be receptive to this, but the first step is taking that person aside and being like, act the same way. You know how everybody does not love when you just offer advice that they didn't ask for?
Yeah.
So in the same way, taking that person aside and being like, hey, I didn't really dig your tweet. Is it cool if we talk about it? And starting there, and that will tell you a lot about that person, how they're receptive, and what they're going to do with the next steps. And having that conversation to start is a lot more productive and more likely to lead to that person learning something. So, and I'm assuming that's kind of your jam, because
Right.
you asked about it.
Yeah.
There's also looking at it from like a social justice advocacy approach, because I work in DC with a number of LGBTQ plus groups. There's kind of this approach of calling out versus calling in, and it really depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to expose and shame a person, then yeah, sure, cancel culture is going to work great for that. If your goal is for the person to behave differently, to learn something, to be better, to apologize, to actually give a shit, then calling in, that is putting them in a position where they're not defensive, where they have an opportunity to learn without feeling as though they're being judged or condemned for it, that's going to actually reach the goal you want. So yeah, it might feel really satisfying to call them out for being an absolute moron on Twitter. But if your goal is for them to be better, calling them out won't accomplish that. And sure, not everybody's receptive, but you still tried. And if you notice that somebody is not receptive, you don't have to throw your entire weight and energy into trying to educate someone who's being a brick wall. But neither do you have to, go out and name and shame them.
Right.
If they're going to kind of end up exposing themselves by promoting these views, then you can leave them to their own downfall without you having to accelerate it. Instead, creating a culture where people feel that they can make mistakes and learn from them. That's one of the single most important things. People need to be able to fail without feeling as though they can't ever succeed again. So creating kind of that sense of, this is a person that I can talk to and learn from without feeling as though they think I'm an idiot, incapable, rude, bigoted, etc. That's going to give you the goal that you actually want.
Yeah.
Wow, I needed to hear all of that like 2 weeks ago. So I have two very specific questions, and then one that I think would tee up a longer discussion. But the first is, what was the name of that mental health award that you mentioned for Stardew Valley?
It's called the Dr. Mark Award.
Dr. Mark.
And it's given by TakeThis.
Wonderful. And second, you mentioned mental health first aid training. Is there an organization that you recommend?
It's called Mental Health First Aid, and if you Google that and you put in locations, like mental health first aid training locations, it immediately pops up and gives you information on that. I've also, if you go check out Mxiety.com, I wrote up a whole blog post about the benefits of taking that training. And I just retook it because you have to be recertified every few months. But to answer your question shortly, it's really easy to find. You just Google that, and there's a ton of locations around the country. There's quite a few around the globe. We actually started in Australia. And if you go to a local YMCA, they will subsidize part of the cost of it. And some places will do it totally for free. I know in New York, you can now get free mental health first aid training. But in New Jersey, where I'm from, the Y I went to subsidize half the cost. So it cost me $40, and then to get recertified, it cost me another $20. So.
That's amazing.
It's kind of like CPR training, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
It very much is.
Yeah.
So the longer question I had was if you had any perspectives on the recent Ninja Theory game, Senua Sacrifice. That was the deep dive into schizophrenia. Curious about your thoughts there.
One more time.
Senua Sacrifice by Ninja Theory was a deep dive into schizophrenia, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I believe Rachel has opinions.
You detected her job card.
I can confidently say that all those that take this who are sitting in the front row love Senua Sacrifice. So Ninja Theory consulted with Dr. Paul Fletcher from the University of Cambridge to create Senua Sacrifice, to present a accurate and non-stereotyped and thoughtful and reflective characterization of schizophrenia in the main character. And what's psychosis. Thank you. I'm so glad you're And what we love about it is that it's just part of the character itself, and it's not kind of like the defining stereotypes. This is a game about somebody with mental health challenges, and the game is going to surround like what is this challenge and how can we fix it. But it's more just like a part of the character itself. I didn't say anything. We love it.
You could play it without having that background and still have like fantastic time just enjoying the journey that this character goes through. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we've talked about with TakeThis is the fact that not everybody wants to have that mental health label like this. That's scary to people. I don't know what I'm about to get into. I don't want to hear about your feelings. Versus being like, this is a really pretty game. Let me check it out. Oh, did I just learn about psychosis? What?
It also does a great job of portraying.
Yes.
So hi there, I'm Denise. I'm a student. This is like my first PAX. So I'm interested in like getting into game development, and especially in terms of like interesting mechanics. And I know that within Life is Strange, part of like the interesting bit about Chapter 2 was that you have this ability to like, this is a spoiler, turn back time, and then you don't have it.
But then they take it away.
They take it away for like that specific conversation. So, were there any other like examples of like interesting ways that game mechanics were used to portray like mental health issues in a similar manner as like?
I know bad ways the game mechanics are used. Standard years.
We can.
Depression Quest.
Depression Quest. Are you familiar with the game Depression Quest? So it's like it's a text-based game that was developed by Zoe Quinn, and it is, you have kind of a paragraph and then you have text-based choices. And it's like, I wake up, I don't really feel like waking up, what should I do? Should I stay in bed? Should I get up anyway? Whatever. And as the game progresses, you start seeing answers that are then crossed out because your depression has progressed and that is no longer an option for you to be able to do those things in your day-to-day. That's
It's
really
based on how well you do with self-care.
Yeah. You should be up there too.
good. It's basically.
No.
I didn't know her before here.
Yes, you did.
So that's a good one.
No.
This is not going to be, I don't think, the answer you were going for, but I have written an entire piece on how Kingdom Hearts educates us on mental health. I thought that game did a fantastic, so if you play, I'm going to spoil it, Birth by Sleep, the .021 where you just play as Aqua, you can't say, so let me tell you what happens. You go into darkness for 10 years. The longer you spend in it, the more the more in despair you become. The demons that you fight stop being difficult to fight and more about you succumbing to them. So basically, depression. And that to me was like a very clear connection without anybody having to state that. It's not in any way, shape, or form connected to it explicitly, but the metaphors are all there. And actually, one of the better things is one of the things that keeps Aqua going is her hope that she will get to her friends, and her friends come and save her. So it's that, like, she's fighting on her own, but she's also excited and willing to get the help from other people. So I just think, you know, having a great narrative to base this beautiful story around was really important.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vinny.
My name's Matt. I'm not in any gaming industry stuff or anything like that. I'm just been playing games all my life, and definitely as I got older, I've gotten more interested in kind of mental representation in games, just because I myself deal with diagnosed depression and anxiety. So it's just been kind of like a thing I continuously see. And what interests me most, though, is not necessarily games that deal front on with it, but a lot of games that have subtext of why characters are doing that. And so I don't know how much, like, if you look, I don't know if the panel of you guys look at older games where characters are not necessarily written saying, like, I have depression, but a lot of the actions of the plot or why they're doing things characterizes what they're doing as, oh, they have a mental health issue. And one series I actually want to bring that attention to is Devil May Cry. And it might not seem like it, but a lot of the whole thing about Dante is that he's actually quite depressed. The whole dynamic of him and his family, really, he can't seem to communicate with other people, and he can't express himself due to his level of depression. So I'm not sure if, like, do you have any examples of, because I loved all the examples that were brought up on the panel, but are there any other games where it's more about the subtext of a character's actions that drives what you know, any mental health discussions that might be going on there? Do you have any other examples? I'm just sorry, I just thought I'd be curious to bring it up, because that's a game series that played recently that I really noticed that out of.
I'm trying to think in terms of ways that it's not overt, and all I can think of is Kafka in Final Fantasy VI, which is overt because they're like, he's psychotic, I think, and that's why he's doing all this terrible stuff.
Sometimes I think it's the subtle ones that can sometimes have the most impact on people.
Oh, absolutely. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
I think that the Kingdom Hearts reference is a really good one.
Yeah.
It was more of a metaphorical depiction than an explicit one.
Yeah, and that one's pretty recent, but if you rewatch the first one and you watch, like, there are moments where Sora loses his friend Riku, right, and then he wants to give up, and his other friends will remind him that he's going to be okay, and because he has them, which is something that's really important in depression, having that group. Another thing is his friend literally is fighting with darkness because he feels abandoned and he feels like Sora left him, and he says, like, darkness will always be a part of me, but it doesn't have to define me. And I remember kind of shedding a tear at that moment, because it's very, like, people live with depression. I also live with depression, and that's very much a, like, I have depression doesn't have me, but I also have to come to terms with, like, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life, but it doesn't mean it has to be all of me, so.
Yeah.
I just have to throw in Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one.
You all know what I mean.
And just actually to expand the Devil May Cry aspect, I find a lot of games with these kind of growth mindset gameplay styles to be very therapeutic, where it's this safe environment that's all about growing your own skill in like a contained way, so you can really see your level of improvement. And the only way you show it is not by, oh, level up, it's no, look how well I did, like look how I've grown out of these rankings. It can be very, as someone who really struggles with having very high standards but not always meeting them to an unrealistic point, I find a lot of games like that to just be very therapeutic as well. So I highly recommend that to anyone. Those types of
I
games.
just want to throw in, because Dr. Sarah is my wingman, friendship development in Persona 5. I haven't played Persona 5, so I cannot expand. And the original Bioshock with behavioral change.
Thank you for your question.
Would you
And going from Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask as like a 9-year-old? Right? Like maybe that explains the way I am. Next question.
Hi, I'm Bill. I'm getting a master's master's in teaching. I'll be focusing on secondary mathematics. I also just came from the incorporating games in learning panel, which was awesome. My question is, as someone who will be a future educator, as somebody who is an educator now, and as somebody who is a gamer, what kind of things and resources should I be looking out for to better understand when a student needs some positive connection? Like, what should I be trying to avoid so that I don't have any kind of Life is Strange Chapter 2 scenarios? That's kind of a big question, but I love the idea of getting first aid, mental health certified, and that seems like really awesome. What are some other resources that someone who's going to be a future educator should be looking out for to make sure that I handle these kinds of students really well?
So, I guess what would you like physical and mental tips for earlier when you're in an influential position for a child?
I guess that's the best way to describe it. I'm going to be in a position of influence.
Yeah.
How do I handle that role as best as I can?
Did you have any
Physical health
yeah.
Anything that you can do to let kids like take regular moving around breaks in your class is going to be good. You'll also find that that's very helpful for getting them to actually pay attention when you're trying to teach them something. There's a lot of research into the gamification of education and kind of the pros and cons of that. But we know that people in general, kids especially, respond really well to external validation and as well as to positive reinforcement more so than negative reinforcement. So having things that are either achievements in class, even if they're small little things, just like a title of, most improved on this metric this week. Or like, in kindergarten we got stickers on the board. Like, look, we as adults are still motivated by stickers on the board in different formats. They might tell you, depending on what age range you're teaching, that they don't actually care about it, but trust me, if you put rainbow stickers up there, people are going to care. So kind of external reward systems that are small and easy to implement. The regular movement, and also looking into what resources are around to support you that either already exist in your school or larger community resources that can be integrated into your school. I'm thinking here of things like High School Esports League, of EGF, of NEP, which is a diversity and inclusion organization, things like TakeThis, using kind of those resources that are available to you in the gaming world because we've kind of identified this need. Those are things that are very much accessible to schools. You'll also find if you're getting involved with any gaming programs at your school or esports programs, there are actually grants available to schools that engage in particular healthcare activities after school, be they physical or mental health. So if you're getting any pushback from your administrators about the value of implementing these things, point them in the direction of the grants. The High School Esports League website has some links to the grant information there.
I would also say that cultural competency around games goes a really long way. And the fact that you're here and asking this question, it's definitely a wonderful direction. I think a lot of people I know a lot of people still discredit games as being a tool that can be incredibly useful.
I heard it in my Uber over here.
So, there are a lot of resources, there are a lot of books. There's a book that just got published in January specifically called Video Games and Wellbeing, which was, but that's not the only book that exists, so there are a lot of resources out there just to see the ways actively and passively that games can be integrated into learning specifically.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you for your response.
I write a mixture of in the games world and the queer world. First off, I wanted to thank you so much for this panel. It's like, as a reporter, I think people just assume that to have the career that I do, I totally have no mental health issues or anything, and it's totally not the case. Dealing with anxiety, OCD, depression, people think very much I'm don't deal with those issues until I talk about them. They're like, what? And so it's really great to see this. I'm so glad it's here. So that is my first part of my compliment over question.
Compliments are allowed.
Good. The second part is that so I'm really interested in this conversation around communal responsibility and cancel culture. More so because as a journalist, I do a lot of things where I'm writing about controversies, people in the industry doing things that are just simply they're unethical and immoral behavior, things like sexual harassment or abuse or things like that. And an issue I've come across is that people are treated and forgiven different ways. If you're queer, if you're a woman of color, if you're trans, you're more likely to get the mob kind of attack that doesn't lead to growth. It just kind of like, just feels like it's attacking because like, here's a marginalized person, go get them. But as a journalist, I also feel a responsibility, no matter the identity of the person, or rather including them. If someone does something that needs to be discussed because it's newsworthy, I have to report about it, right? So I've been grappling with this issue a lot as a professional. It feels like there's a very thin line between holding someone accountable versus accountability abuse. For the sake of someone's mental health and well-being, what advice do you have for journalists like me working, to try to make the industry better, but also safer?
So I was thinking specifically for journalism. There's a friend I have out in California, in Stranding. She's done a lot of work on journalism and trauma reporting, which I think definitely has carried over to discussion of traumatic events when you're discussing the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator potentially.
Could you say the name again?
Sure. So her tag is a straw with 2 W's.
Is that Aiden?
Yes.
Oh my god, I love
yes.
Aiden.
she has a lot of resources on her Twitter page on meaningful consent and trauma reporting, and I think those definitely have carryover to writing about controversial events that definitely need reporting on.
I would just, the only thing that's awesome, because that's a resource, the only thing that I would add is, what are you focusing on? Are you, when you're writing the article, when you're tweeting, is your focus to be like, this person is abhorrent, or are you saying this behavior is okay? And that's a huge difference. So if you're calling out the behavior, you're doing them more justice versus attacking. Because again, you can, if I don't get attacked as a person, I don't feel like the action I took is all of me. Like, this is the only thing that I'm presenting to the world, is this terrible action that I did.
Yeah, if you give them more of that context of, this is a person who has done a bad action, not this is a bad person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a huge difference. Thank you. This is really helpful.
Thank you for your compliments.
My pleasure.
For speaking with us today. My question revolves, it's directed towards GamerDoc and Dr. Kowert. Please respond if you have any. So, I think we've seen something due to the internet, how celebrities such as streamers differ from people maybe like The Rock, right? So GamerDoc, you go by GamerDoc.
Uh-huh.
So, I know other streamers do the same. Do you foresee any long-term health consequences, such as split personality disorder, from doing this over a long term?
Wow. So what your question is going by a different persona going to have any long-term health consequences? I hope not. I think that a lot of times, the reason why I don't go by my, legal name when I'm out there is a couple of reasons. One is it's to liability shield me. I am a medical doctor, and if people interpret something as a patient relationship, this is so new that there hasn't been a lot of studies or long-term effects yet, but it's legally a little bit easier, but also, streamers are playing character. It is The Rock, it is WWE. Wait, hold on.
More WWE.
But it's funny. I was going to bring this up in the last talk, but on the last talk, I was having a conversation with Gene Park, who's a Washington Post journalist, a couple weeks ago, and him and I were commiserating over the fact that we're both extroverted introverts. So I am very, if you've ever seen my streams or you've seen my videos, I'm very animated, I'm very there and alive, but then I need to go by myself for 5 hours. And so having this persona, having this separate name allows me to have a work-life balance, basically, because I'm myself, until I put on that GamerDoc hat, and then I can step into this, high energy, trying to be entertaining personality, but then when I step away, I can go back into my normal, life. So if your question was, it's going to have long-term health consequences for me, I think it's going to shield me from, professional burnout, because I'm not always that person. If I was just going by my full legal name, then I would always be, I would feel the need to always be on.
Is this something that is worth being on the radar for streamers?
So since we have like a few minutes, I will give the TLDR. Personality disorders as a clinical diagnosable disorder are incredibly rare, and there's no research to suggest that they are created based on the behaviors that we do. I don't know how to say that more eloquently. So I would say that there is no reason to suggest, there's no scientific evidence to suggest that having a stage name, for instance, would in any way relate to a clinically diagnosable personality disorder.
And from a bit of a personal note, not stream regularly like your persona, but as someone who is on the autism spectrum, I kind of have a public and a me persona. The public persona involves filtering. It involves intentional and conscious interpretation of people's verbal and nonverbal cues. And yes, that's tiring, but at no time has I ever felt like there's a conflict between these two parts of me. There's just how I present myself publicly, and then how I am privately with people that I'm comfortable with. I've never found any confusion between the two, and I'm definitely in agreement with Rachel that I don't think this is going to lead to a split personality disorder.
And dissociative identity disorder, which is what it's called in the DSM, is typically caused by trauma. So not something.
Thank you.
I have more coffee. I'm sorry. If you don't. So
You mentioned earlier, and allow me to preface this that this is not asking for medical advice, nor is it medical advice. Listen, I'm a mom, okay?
Exclamation point disclaimer.
Yeah, pretty much. So you were talking earlier about like wearing the bag, and one thing that we all are dealing with here is bag fatigue. What, in your non-medical advice opinion, what would be a good way to carry our junk around?
All right, so best option is a double strap backpack. Even better if you can put a strap across your chest or across your torso. Make sure that your backpack is not hanging down low, but the closer it can be, the snugger a fit it is, the better. Next best option is a shoulder bag that goes across your body as opposed to just on one shoulder. Next best option after that is shoulder bag over a single shoulder. And actually, the best of all would be if you have a small enough quantity of items. They're not fashionable, but fanny packs are great. They're right here.
Fanny packs are fashionable. They are fierce.
They're coming back.
If you see me tomorrow, I will be wearing one. How dare you?
Anybody know if we have to go through the bag check if we have fanny packs, by the way?
Yes.
You guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
What's up?
Wash your hands.